welcome to part 2 of the Hyrox deep dive series. Today we are looking at the sled push. We will cover form and technique, how to train for it, and all the little details that will help you on race day. The sleds are iconic to Hyrox. Anyone that has pushed them knows you haven't pushed a sled until you've pushed a Hyrox sled, because there's just something about that friction, the previous running, that makes the sled push so brutal within the Hyrox race. So let's talk technique, because there are a few different methods. I'll start with the method that I use and which I recommend to nearly everyone, and that is the shoulders through stance. I'm now pretty confident that is the most effective stance. I have used it from my very first Hyrox and it has served me well. I got the fastest men's pro time at Frankfurt, and you're seeing it adopted more and more. Even Hunter McIntyre, after years of pushing with his shoulders behind, adopted the shoulders through stance in his most recent race at the World Championships in Manchester. Now, having said that, I actually don't think you should try and go for the fastest sled time, because you could mess up the rest of your race. But what I'm trying to say is I think this position is better for a few reasons. The shoulders through stance looks like this. Open palms, forearms along the bars and shoulders through. From here, I want to make sure my spine is neutral and my hips are just below my shoulders. You can play around with how high or how low you want your arms. I tend to like my hands in the middle of the poles, and that keeps my elbows in line with my hips. The benefit of this position is it puts your center of mass over the sled. This takes a lot of the upper body tension out of the movement. From this position, I've got space to breathe, and you can actually create more of a pulling sensation from your shoulders to your elbows. The reason I don't like the shoulders behind stance is it requires a lot of upper body bracing and tension, and your elbows can end up pushing into your lungs, which restricts your breathing. When it comes to pushing, you want to start by pushing off of both feet, either in a staggered stance or straight on. And start with short steps. You can get your momentum going, and then you can take longer strides once you're moving if you want to. If you're finding your calves are blowing up, you can push with a flatter foot and think about dragging your leg behind you. This uses more hamstrings, and you may need to have your hips a little higher. The reason I don't like the straight arm stance is because the center of mass is further from the sled, and now you have to support and stabilize through your wrist, your elbow, and your shoulder, which at a heavy load is inefficient. A couple of exceptions to the rule. Number one, if the sled is really light for you, if, for example, you're used to doing pro weight sleds and then you jump into doubles where the weights are lighter and you need to go quicker, you may find it's just more efficient to hit it from behind and it doesn't affect you too much. The other exception I make is you can try using different techniques in combination with each other to offset some of the muscle fatigue. So you could do as much as you can with your shoulders through, then go to shoulders behind for a bit, then arms straight. But I would still recommend you practice the shoulders through stance and try to get comfortable with it to the point where you can do it for the whole way. So that's the technique. Now, how do we train for it? When it comes to training for sled push, strength is key. Building leg strength through your quads, hamstrings, and calves will give you the drive, and training your lower back and core will give you the ability to brace against the heavy load. The sleds at Hyrox often feel harder than the sleds at gyms because the surface and the friction. So I would recommend going heavier than the prescribed weight unless you have felt it before, and then you can kind of adjust accordingly. Now, I wouldn't just use sled work to strengthen your legs. Traditional lifts like split squats, front squats, back squats are most effective at increasing your strength capacity. I also like the Zercher lunges. You can do these with a heavy sandbag or a barbell. It might feel quite awkward, but it is massively effective at working your lower back, core, and challenging your ability to brace in a similar position to the sled push itself. I would use the sled push as finishers at the end of your session, and then do more of them within workouts in the build up to your race, because you also need to practice running before and after the sled push. Now on to race strategy. When it comes to the race, the sled push is where things start to get serious. If you go too hard, they will just eat you up and spit you out. Unless you are doing doubles, nobody goes all 4 lengths without any breaks, or at least not yet, thank God. Quite simply, the sleds create a build-up of fatigue in your legs, and then your respiratory system works to clear the fatigue. If you push really hard without braking, you build fatigue faster than you can clear it, and then your performance suffers massively. If you take small breaks before you feel an excessive buildup of fatigue, it becomes a lot more manageable. And although it may be slower, you can run instead of stagger out of the station. Have a play around with it. In training, I like to do the 1K run into the sled push, into the 1K run, time it, take a little bit of rest, and then go again, and try running and pushing at different paces to see what works for you. When you're in the race, remember to go at your own pace. Don't get sucked into a sled battle. What works for you may be different to your competitors. And then the final thing to note is, out of all the Hyrox stations, the sleds are the most inconsistent. From race to race, there's tons of speculation as to why and how it can be solved. And I hope that they do get more consistent, but just be prepared to adapt on the fly. I like to do 3 lengths, breaking at each end, and then the last length I break halfway. However, there was a time in London where the sleds felt much harder, and I tried to just stick it out and go with my plan, and I ended up overexerting. So I recommend for this station in particular, going on feeling rather than time. So to summarize, practice the shoulders through stance technique, do your squats, practice your running in and out of the sleds, and be prepared to adapt on the fly. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment. You can check out my Hyrox Training Principles ebook on my website, and follow me on Instagram for plenty more tips and tricks on all things health and fitness. Until next time, peace.